Hey everybody, this is Richard and welcome to another episode of Fatal Error. This show began as a research project for me to understand how entrepreneurs and founders think about the climate emergency and figure out ways in which all organizations, not just non-profits, can become climate positive. Today's guest is Alex Wick, founder and CEO of Cascadia Carbon. Like many of us, Alex has a mixed background, but in his case, it combines biology, coding, and forestry. His mission is to use modern tech to help folks reduce and offset their carbon footprints. Cascadia's first project, Codex, aims to incentivize people to change their transportation habits. Let's hear what you have to say. What's your personal background, and what is this company doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Alex Wick, and I'm a former forester, geospatial data scientist, and the founder and CEO of Cascadia Carbon. My company is building what we call technology-enabled climate change solutions. And the first one we developed is an app called Codex. And so Codex, essentially at its core, is a carbon footprint calculator, which automatically detects your mode of transport as you move throughout the world. It also then generates offsets from your low carbon transport choices. So when you, let's say, bus to school or bike to work, or take the train to visit relatives at the holidays, all that is lower carbon than business as usual, which is driving.
Uh-huh.
So we detect that with our app, and we have what we call algorithmically verified carbon offsets. And yeah.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. I hadn't got to that just from your website. So let me ask you one thing first about. So you said it calculates your offset, right? And then it suggests what you should pay as an offset, or how does it work? And what are you recommending as an offset?
Yes, we actually generate our own offsets from our users' low carbon transport choices. So the carbon offset space is it's a well-established paradigm, the idea of a carbon offset, but there's a lot of flexibility in like what is considered an offset. There's traditionally been three different forms of offsets. The main one your listeners have probably heard of are probably renewable energy credits.
Uh-huh.
So the idea is that a wind farm or a solar panel field, you're going above and beyond business as usual, which is the language which California, who is sort of the pioneer in the offset space, uses to determine what actually is an offset. So this above and beyond business as usual just means that you basically went out of your way to go above and beyond normal business practices. So you sort of inconvenience yourself for the good of the environment.
Okay.
So historically, beyond renewable energy credits, there's also been forestry offsets. Forestry is actually humanity's only carbon negative industry. When you think about everything else, from shipping food to shipping goods, or concrete making, steel making, everything we do, building homes, houses, apartments, essentially everything we do as humans is carbon positive. We produce carbon, in the production of steel, for example. Forestry is our only carbon negative industry, in that even after you drive to the forest, you cut down the trees with, gasoline powered chainsaws, you pull them out with, gasoline powered equipment, take it to a sawmill. Even after all of that, the carbon that's stored in the trees, because as you probably know, carbon, trees take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. they're essentially sort of the flip side to animals. And we more or less have in the past balanced each other out. But yeah, so forestry is the only carbon negative industry we have. So that's also another prime source of carbon offsets. If you as a landowner agree to let your trees continue growing as opposed to harvesting them, that's, as I mentioned before, above and beyond business as usual. And you, as a landowner, can get rewarded for that in the form of a carbon offset credit.
Okay. Okay. So then you also said that your app, I think the phrase used was that it's an algorithmically verified carbon offset. Just for the sort of like geeks in us, right? What do you mean? Like anything is an algorithm, right? What is your algorithm based on? How does it work? What's behind it?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll get a little technical here.
Get as technical as you like, and then if it becomes too technical, we can zoom back out.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so basically we're using a core ML algorithm, which your device basically returns an expected result based on sensors, so accelerometer data, location data. It'll spit out essentially, are you walking, are you cycling, or are you driving? And that can be calculated with, I think, 99% certainty based on like a pedometer signal as well as speed travel. And we're taking that a step further. We use a support vector machine classifier, which we laid on top of this core ML algorithm. And that allows us to differentiate buses and trains from driving. So now we have a return which tells basically how you move through the world. Are you on a bus? Did you take the bus to work? Did you hop on a train to get up to Seattle, for example? Or are you sitting in traffic? And then we take each of those that return data for method of transport or mode of transport, and we multiply that by a carbon coefficient. And that varies based on whether you're on an electric bus, a diesel locomotive, even what car you're in. If you're driving an F-150 versus, for example, a Nissan Leaf.
Right, got it. Okay, so let's switch. This is something which I'm curious about. Let's switch a little bit to sort of like the business side of things, because you're not a charity, right? You're trying to run a profitable business, in a with a social sort of like an environmental aspect to it. But what's your revenue model for this? Is the app paid? Are you doing advertising? How are you generating money or aiming to? I don't know where you are at the moment.
Yeah, so we're what we call a carbon neutral certified B-Corp. And I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with B corporations, but it's an alternative corporate structure which, as opposed to just solely focusing on profit for the shareholders of the company, it takes into account what is called the triple bottom line. So it's people, planet, and profit. Mm-hmm. By including people and planet in your corporate bottom line, it allows you to not only generate profit, but then to also take into consideration some of these previously externalized factors, like environmental footprint. So basically, what our company is doing, we're disrupting the carbon offset marketplace. Traditionally, it's been only available if you own, for example, several hundred megawatts of wind turbines, which is not really accessible to the average American. But I mean, each of us goes above and beyond business as usual, or may go above and beyond business as usual every day. If you choose to bike to work, even one day a week, that's a big difference. That can eliminate hundreds of pounds of carbon, over a year.
Yep.
So we're monetizing an offset. So by calculating how far and how fast you are moving using alternative transport, we can tokenize that data and post it to a low energy blockchain. And this allows us to store it, it allows for transparency, immutability, as well as security. Three things which carbon offsets really, it's imperative that they must have these three things. So blockchain is actually an excellent use case for storing carbon offsets. But as I said, these carbon offsets have value. At the beginning of the year, they're around $20 a ton. Right now, they're up to around $30 a ton. And Stanford released a study, I believe back in February, that calculated the true cost of carbon at over $220 for every single ton. So it's quickly becoming recognized that carbon is, not only a pollutant and not only a problem that we really have to get a handle on if we're going to persist as a society, but it's really an important thing that we have to start being aware of. So our raises that awareness among our users, but also allows them to make some money from their personal transportation choices.
Okay, so your revenue model, if I'm understanding correctly, is that you're sort of taking a transaction fee, kind of. It's like a transaction fee between, you're enabling somebody to, monetize their carbon offset, right? Which they previously wouldn't have been able to. And you're taking a cut in the process. And
so we
sort of generating revenue that way.
We're a sustainability software as a service provider.
Okay.
So we do all the heavy lifting, calculating your carbon output as well as your carbon offsets. And then whenever you generate a carbon offset, you take a percentage of that.
And are you profitable at the moment? Are you generating revenue? What's your user base like?
Yeah, so we have an app which is launched in the App Store by the end of this month. But we have about 150 beta testers who are providing us with feedback, which we're iterating on. We currently have about 35 tons of carbon offsets generated by myself, my co-founder, and our beta testers. So at current market prices, that works out to around $1,000 of profit. At $220 a ton, it's significantly more.
Okay, and are you funded? Are you self-funded? Did you raise money?
So right now we're raising a seed round. As I said, our product is launching at the end of this month, and we'll be closing that round by the end of the year. We expect to be. We're already carbon negative, but we're generating carbon offsets. We expect to convert that into revenue by Q1 of 2020.
Okay, so how's the process of raising money has been for you? Or, you're still in it, right? So you haven't, let's not count your chickens, but it's sort of interesting still to hear what's been your experience so far with, pitching to, do you find investors who care about the stuff nowadays? What's been your experience there?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different for us, I think, than most startups because we do have this social good aspect. And from the start, we've been a carbon neutral corporation, which actually adds a whole additional layer of really reporting requirements on, because we have to show that every server hosting cost, we have to actually offset that electricity. So even though we don't have a physical product that we're shipping, which would be an astronomical carbon production, we still have a bunch of reporting requirements. As far as the angel investment, it's difficult to find value aligned investors. There's investors who put money into companies with solely expecting that they're going to get a return on that money. They're a dime a dozen. But to find someone who's a value aligned investor, so someone who wants to make money from their money, but also wants to invest in things that they believe in. So it's not just profit. It's, as I said, the triple bottom line.
Yeah.
People plan. That's a little more difficult. So right now we're bootstrapped. We are looking for investment, but we have a revenue model, which is, I guess I'll say, uncommon
Okay.
for sustainability startups.
Okay. Okay. Well, that could be a big plus or a challenge. I'm not an expert, but revenue models can sort of like work both ways, I suppose, when you're innovating there. But let me ask you a little bit. So, you mentioned being a proper B corporation, where you mentioned like there's a whole additional layer of like reporting requirements, offsetting server hosting costs, and things like that. Very coincidentally, I'm actually speaking to one of the founders of the B corporation movement tomorrow. Who will be There'll be an episode. His name is Tim Frick. And I'm sure I'll be able to like grill him on a few things there. But it would be interesting to get like from your perspective, what are these like, what are these reporting requirements? Like how did you get going? Is it something which is basically like an ongoing pain in the ass, or is it something which is like a one-time thing and then you get over them and it's just business as usual?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a natural fit for us. I've always sort of been not always, but for a long time, been aware of B corporations, and I try to support them because they do go through these sort of additional hoops to prove that they're a socially responsible company, which is, absolutely where I want to spend my money over, some sort of faceless corporate entity. So yeah, we sort of knew from the start we were interested in B corporation status. In terms of the reporting requirements, so you go through a process online which basically gets a baseline on your company. So everything from usage, in your offices to how you treat your employees. Do you offer paid time off for maternity leave? How do you, do you allow or encourage your employees to volunteer? So it's a very comprehensive framework. We were able to, coming from the carbon neutral starting place, and I've lived what I call a low carbon lifestyle for almost a decade now. So that means really limiting my flying, limiting or not flying, not driving, trying to limit my meat consumption and just be conscious about my own personal carbon footprint.
Yeah.
That definitely gave us a leg up in terms of filling out the framework. I've been buying 100% renewable energy for, over a decade, and living in the Pacific Northwest, it's fairly easy to do.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, it's not as easy over here in the UK at the moment, but it's getting better.
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned, for example, server hosting costs, right? Which is one of the sort of like the hidden dirty secrets of our industry, right? Of the internet, where I think the most recent stats put the kind of the carbon footprint of the internet as being larger than global air travel. And it's still growing. So what have you found, for example, hosting which is already sustainable? Are there are there hosting companies which are B Corps or which are trying to be, where you what's the best way of hosting your app or your software?
Yeah, so right now we're using a hosting company which doesn't go out of its way to be sustainable, but we do calculate our server load, and then we purchase carbon offsets in order to offset that.
Okay.
And like you said, I mean, hosting and the whole internet infrastructure, even if you're going, quote unquote serverless, there's still, huge data centers which are running, millions of servers of, terabytes or petabytes of data are being stored and then the cooling costs for all that. But I will say that as compared to like any sort of physical product, it's an order of magnitude smaller. So like the top three causes of carbon emissions for most people in their daily lives, the first one is driving. And actually driving is probably the most difficult one to offset or to change, because a lot of people, they don't live close to their work. You know, they don't have options to take public transit or bicycle. And cars are incredibly inefficient because they have essentially their own power plant. So each engine is its own power plant, and you lose efficiency the smaller the engine is. So
and even just the producing a car, the actual production process of producing a car, that's almost impossible to offset. Even not impossible, but
more than the production cost of the car. Each car in America is driven around 200 miles a week, and that produces over 200 pounds of carbon dioxide every single week. So every single week you're driving your car, you're producing probably more than your body weight in this gas, carbon dioxide. For reference, that's a 15-foot in diameter weather balloon filled with pure carbon dioxide every single week, you know, of every. So and if we're going to solve climate change, we don't have to get our emissions down to zero, because there's the Amazon rainforest, there's the boreal forest in Canada, that's really sucking at huge amounts of carbon. But we do have to get down to a sustainable level, a level where we can plant enough trees that we can actually restore that balance in the ecosystem.
Okay, so what is a sustainable level? I mean, I know you're not maybe like a climate scientist, but what is a sustainable level in terms of like on a personal level, right? So you mentioned, for example, a car in the US is driven around 200 miles a week. I think that's what you said, right? Assuming there was an alternative, like the right alternative, magically somehow, for the moment, how many miles would need to be driven for it to be like sustainable at that point? What is it? Are we talking like 10 miles a week? Where do we need to be? Where's it at?
Yeah, so even like a 12% reduction. So if you bike to work one day a week, that makes a huge difference. Over a year, that's probably a ton of carbon per person. So, and it's, you have to take a holistic view. So if you, let's say if you have a 30-mile commute to work every day, you may not be able to alter that, but there are other things you can alter. So, I mean, Amazon 2-day shipping is a huge emitter, because they have to literally fly packages from across the states, or to Canada or to the UK. So if you choose 1 week shipping, that makes a big difference. So there are little things you can do, or if you can't stop driving, you can eat less meat. And I'm not saying don't eat any meat, just try to eat a little bit less.
Thank you for listening. Please visit fatalair.blog to join our mailing list and help support our community and project. And if you like the music, please check out the Happy Quartet on Bandcamp. That's it for today.